Other corporate front groups include the Foundation for Biomedical Research, the National Association for Biomedical Research, and Policy Directions Incorporated, all of them working from the same address in Washington, D.C., and all of them created by Frankie Trull to serve the vivisection industry. Trull opposes even minor amendments to the Animal Welfare Act. She has opposed, there was a proposal for, to give dogs that were caged and used in experiments, to give them periodic exercise. She opposed this. She opposed extending even minor consideration to mice and rats that were used in vivisection laboratories, and that was simply going too far as well. In addition to opposing laws that might improve the treatment of animals even slightly, Trull and her organizations have worked to create repressive laws against animal activism. She boasts that her two biggest achievements were the 1992 Animal Enterprise Protection Act and the 2006 Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, which replaced the previous legislation. Well, talking about the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act for a moment. Influential industries pushed for this legislation to stop animal activism. In 2005, Senator James Inhofe organized and chaired a hearing of the Senate Committee on the Environment to investigate the Animal Liberation Front, and this was a prelude to establishing the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. Inhofe called the ALF terrorists by definition, who used intimidation, threats, acts of violence, and property destruction to force their opinions upon society. He compared the ALF to Al-Qaeda and claimed that these terrorists were obtaining money from mainstream animal groups such as PETA. John Lewis, the FBI's Assistant Director for Counterterrorism, also told the committee that the #1 domestic terrorism threat is the eco-terrorism animal rights movement, and he called for expanded laws to dismantle this movement. Lewis said that compared to anti-abortionists, the KKK, and right-wing extremists, the ALF is way out in front in terms of the damage they are causing. He denied that anti-abortion groups could be defined as terrorists, despite the fact that they use extreme violence to force their opinions on society. Anti-abortionists had murdered at least 9 people in the USA, and seriously wounded at least 12 others in shootings, arsons, acid attacks, and bombings before the 2005 hearings, and more violent attacks, murderous attacks on people happened afterwards. Comparing extremist violence by animal rights and anti-abortion activists from 1977 to 1993, Johnson, in a 2007 study, looked at acts against people, including bombings, arson, attempted bombing or arson, major and minor murder, attempted murder, kidnapping, acid attack, assault and threat, and acts against property, bombings, arson, attempts to do this, minor and major property damage, hoaxes, so on. Comparing these incidents, he found a total of 1,079 incidents committed by anti-abortion activists and theft, whereas that's in the category of arson for anti-abortionists. Again, theft likely refers to the rescue of animals from situations where they're going to be tortured or killed. Of actions against people included in this study, animal activists were responsible only for threats and committed no murder, kidnapping, acid attack, or assault. And in contrast to the non-violent actions of animal activists, anti-abortion activists were responsible for violence against humans and property at a ratio of 3 to 1. And as I said, more murders, attempted murders, acid attacks, and bombings by anti-abortionists continued after this, but the FBI still refuse to recognize this as terrorism. Well, industry guided this legislation, the Terrorism Act, through to its passage, assisted by politicians whose services they had purchased through financial contributions, and who themselves had financial interests in the industries that this legislation would affect. For example, Inhofe, the senator who chaired the hearings, had substantial investments, personal investments in energy industries, and he's a major recipient of money from these sources. He consistently voted against environmental and public health regulations that would affect these industries. He's a staunch defender of factory farming, and he's received numerous awards and honors from these industries. These industries cheered the Terrorism Act, but activists and civil rights advocates pointed out that it was dangerous. It's very broad and vague. The penalties imposed by the Terrorism Act are out of all proportion to the activities covered, imposing longer sentences for nonviolent actions that cause loss of profits to corporations than for actions that cause direct harm to human beings. And opponents pointed out that this was running out of animal activists to spy on, so they've now branched out to include other threats to society, such as anti-war demonstrators and environmental groups who have only ever engaged in peaceful direct action. Well, of course, targeting all of these groups as terrorists helps to justify police budgets. There are other beneficiaries of animal rights terrorism. Others have a direct interest in exaggerating this threat. As Edward Herman pointed out 2 decades ago, there's a large network of experts and institutions that are organized to produce politically useful analyses, definitions, and understandings of terrorism. And since that time, the industry has grown substantially. The Washington Post recently reported that since 2001, the U.S. has developed a defense and intelligence bureaucracy so large, so unwieldy, and so secretive that no one knows how much money it costs, how many people it employs, or whether it is making the United States safer. There are at least 1,271 government organizations and 1,931 private companies that are engaged in secret counterterrorism, homeland security, and intelligence operations in over 10,000 locations, with 33 new building complexes in Washington, D.C. alone to house these bureaucracies. At least 850 personnel, 850,000 personnel with top secret clearance, and thousands of other jobs associated with these bureaucracies. So clearly a lot of money being spent here. Just as the military requires the constant production of new enemies to justify its existence, and the continued inflow of public funds, so do counterterrorism bureaucracies such as these need a constant supply of terrorists. Hundreds of millions of dollars are being spent on these, on this research, provides a boost for universities who get into this business. Promoting the menace of animal rights terrorism provides jobs for people who create themselves as experts on terrorism, who advise business on how to counteract it and sell security technology to them. These organizations have a vested interest in portraying animal activism as terrorism rather than simply as minor crimes such as trespassing or property damage.